The Iran nuclear deal. I'm Jordan Campbell, and this is Scholar's Mate. Hello and welcome to Scholar's Mate. I'm your host, Jordan Campbell. Congress's deadline for rejecting the nuclear deal with Iran is approaching, and many experts have come out in favor or against the deal. Today we're focusing on one aspect of the settlement, the inspection regime. Specifically, is the inspection regime in the deal robust enough to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon? Joining us to discuss the issue is Michaela Dodge of the Heritage Foundation. She specializes in missile defense, nuclear weapon modernization, and arms control as policy analyst for defense and strategic policy in Heritage's Allison Center for Foreign Policy Studies. She is a former National Security Fellow with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies and a former Publius Fellow at the Claremont Institute. She's also a former Center for Strategic and International Studies Pony Nuclear Scholars Initiative scholar. Also joining us is Lawrence Korb of the Center for American Progress. Dr. Korb is a former Senior Fellow and Director of National Security Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Dr. Korb served as an Assistant Secretary of Defense and has held full-time teaching positions at the University of Dayton, Coast Guard Academy, and the Naval War College. Dr. Korb also serves on PublicSquare.net's Board of Directors. Thank you all both so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
So, Michaela Dodge. You believe that the inspection regime is not strong enough to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. Could you explain?
Yes, absolutely. So the inspection regime is designed to detect whether Iran is complying with provisions of the agreement or not. But there are no tools in the inspection regime itself to take potentially prohibited activities away from Iran or ban them or dismantle them. So all the inspection regime can do is to tell you, this is what Iran is doing. Now, to make matters a little more complicated, it is not at all certain that inspections or verification provisions with the IAEA will be able to detect Iranian illicit activities, because the IAEA has missed these activities in the past in different countries, in different contexts in Iran itself.
And Larry, would you like to respond?
Well, I think this is the most demanding, intrusive, comprehensive, and unprecedented set of inspections that we've ever had, with all of the arms control agreements we've had, going back to the first arms control agreement that President Nixon negotiated with the Soviet Union, and other agreements that were negotiated. It allows the International Atomic Energy Agency to inspect anytime any of the nuclear sites that we know about. And we know about them because the IAEA has been in there ever since Iran signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. In fact, when they found out they were cheating, that's how we had the sanctions that led them to the bargaining table. It also allows the inspectors to go into undeclared sites that have not been known before, and it puts a time limit on, which is something we've never had in any other agreement, where we say, well, this wasn't, listed, we want to go there, and the Soviets or the Russians could say no. They have only 24 days to be able to do it. The other is that the IAEA can monitor their supply chain. So if they want to cheat or they want to change something, I think we'll be able to follow it. And then the final thing is, in addition to this, the agreement we signed the powers signed with the Iranians, the fact of the matter is there's an additional protocol that they have agreed to, which will allow the International Atomic Energy Agency to continue to inspect after the provisions in this deal begin to expire in 10 or 15 years for 25 years.
I'd like to remind our audience that you can submit your questions to our guests through our website, www.publicsquare.net, and we'll answer as many as we can live on air toward the end of the show. Would you like to respond to any of what Larry just said?
Yes, so first of all, I do not agree that it's the most intrusive verification regime ever negotiated. When we look at Libyan case, we had anytime, anywhere access. We had access to their scientists, to their documentation, and we took all of these centrifuges out of the country. We're not doing that in the case of Iran. In fact, Iran said that they will not allow access to their scientists and to some of their potential sites. The second point is Iran has developed some of the facilities like Natanz in defiance of the IAEA. And the IAEA found out about facilities way later, years later after they were built. So I do not think that it's a robust regime, but I also think there are so many problems with the process itself that we may not be able to detect. And the second point is, still, the mechanism how verification itself would stop Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. It's not clear to me how that would work, because we would need additional tools to do that.
Well, if you take a look at the nuclear scientists who've been involved, including Dick Garwin, with whom I had the pleasure of working at the council, who was one of the people that developed the hydrogen bomb for the United States. He said there's no way that they can get away with anything given the way these procedures are. Will they try? I think they might. But don't forget, you got 150 inspectors on the ground, which you didn't have in Libya. The IAEA people are there all of the time. And if the Libyans tried to cheat, there was no snapback provisions or there was no time limit if they didn't. I'm glad that they did, but you didn't have any of these limits on it, nor did you have a snapback provision which says if they violate it and you can't work it out, the sanctions get snapped back on.
I personally don't think that the snapback provision is such a strong deterrent because it doesn't apply retroactively. And because the sanctions relief is front-loaded, what happens is Iran gets billions of dollars worth of deals, and even if sanctions do snap back, they will not stop the money flow. And also, the sanctions regime itself is a result of hundreds of trips of US officials, State Department officials, to foreign banks, to our partners, and tell them, look, do not trade with Iran. But it will be way more difficult to convince the same partners once the billions of dollars are flowing.
Well, I think it's important, and it's interesting you mentioned that because some of the members like Senator Schumer have said that's one of the reasons he's opposed to the deal. But the fact of the matter is it was the Europeans that joined with us in putting these sanctions on that made them effective. And so the idea that somehow or another they're not going to, go after Iran if they should violate it. Remember, the French were tougher than we were in the negotiations. The Germans basically are very concerned about what happens to Israel given their history. So I think that it's easier said than done that if the provisions get snapped back. And remember that the UN sanctions can go back. Not even if the other partners don't, the UN sanctions go back, and nobody can veto that the way that this deal is written. If there is a violation and they don't conform after the 24 days are up, or to let the people in.
Larry, I think probably a lot of our viewers as well, but I've heard that many people are concerned about the 24 days. So walk us through the inspection process, what specifically for this deal, the inspection process and the pros and cons of those waiting periods.
All right, what the 24 days is that's the maximum that Iran can prevent you from going into a site that has not been declared. Under the agreement that's made, there are 20 places you can go. Just say, I'm going, and that's it. So this is an undeclared site. So what happens if the IAEA, getting intelligence from any of the members, says, well, we think this place over there, we need to go in. The Iranians can say, well, no, that's not a nuclear site, and they can discuss this for up to 14 days. But you don't have to go the whole 14 days. We can say, no, I mean, we're ready to go. And then you would have, for the next 7 days, you'd have all of the powers that were involved can vote on whether to go in there. And again, it's a majority vote. The Russians or the Chinese can't veto it. So we don't have to take the whole 7 days if we're really concerned. And then after that, they have 3 days to let you in, or if they don't, then the sanctions get snapped back. So everybody seized on it. That's a maximum, and I think if we're there, we're not going to let it go to the maximum. But even then, and the scientists, who wrote the letter there, and these Nobel Prize winners and stuff, said it'd be very hard, after, even if you went to 24 days, for them to hide any real nuclear type of thing. And I think it's important to keep in mind. Everybody says, well, why, should they even been delayed? Well, the fact of the matter is, supposing somebody says we want to go to the Ayatollah's bedroom, I mean, you've got to have some sort of procedure. And the Iranians feel that we're not just interested in their nuclear thing, a lot of their other military activities, which obviously you're concerned with, but that's not part of the deal.
Michaela, your response?
Well, I would say that 21st days, the way the IAEA works is they always try to clarify potential discrepancies with the host country first. So they will go to Iran and they will say, this is what is happening, it's potentially problematic, can you explain? And there are no time periods for those procedures, and so 24 days can be extended. Now, beyond that though, the issue is the verification regime itself, and whether you're opposing or whether you like the agreement, both parties agree on it. It's designed to work in tandem with intelligence. And so the problem is that the way the procedure is set up is we will have to share intelligence with Iran, which can be particularly problematic when it comes to Iranian covert activities. They would not do illicit activities on sites where we have inspectors. They would not do them on sites where, which we see, where potentially activities occurred in the past. And so that intelligence sharing problem is an additional hurdle where you might be facing a choice of revealing your sources and methods to the Iranians and the Russians and the Chinese, or deciding to forego inspections.
Great. Michaela, another question about, so the Secretary of Energy, Secretary Moniz, has come out in strong favor of the Iran deal, and he said that it would be impossible for Iran to hide these. If they were to have a nuclear program, it would be impossible to hide these materials even for 24 days. Your response to that statement?
I think in the case of nuclear weapon activities involving radioactive material, it would be difficult for Iran to hide those activities because the instrumentation picking up radioactivity is very sensitive. However, for activities that do not involve radioactive material, for example, detonators, high explosive works, it would be fairly easy, and the agreement is not set up to detect that kind of cheating.
I would like to go back to the IAEA failures that you were speaking of earlier. And specifically, do you see any connections to prior failures of IAEA and this current agreement?
I think it's important to keep in mind that the IAEA was not set up to detect nuclear weapons program. It was set up to detect whether a country is diverting radioactive material for potential military purposes. And so the tool, that's a pedigree of the IAEA. Now, in early 1990s, when the IAEA was surprised about the Iraqi nuclear weapons program, the additional protocols came into being, and the international community gave the IAEA some additional tools to detect weapons activities. That being said, it's still very problematic and very difficult to detect nuclear weapons activities. It will be difficult in Iran for intelligence purposes because of Iranian cheating. It will be difficult from resource standpoint. And I just don't see that changing in the next 10, 15, 25 years.
response?
Well, I think it's interesting. We furnish intelligence. General Clapper, who's the head of our intelligence community, said this deal is going to improve our ability to see what's going on in there. And if you had this so-called 24-day deal where you wanted to go someplace and they said no, I would assume we've had satellites and all kinds of things, checking on it. So it's not just the IAEA, that does it. And going back to the point about the additional protocol, Iran didn't have to sign it. They signed it, okay, to allow even more. The one thing I do worry about is I hope Congress continues to fund the IAEA because we don't have a budget or anything like that, but they need a bigger budget to be able to go in and do more of these. They have about 100 to 150 people on the ground in Iran at all times.
Any other comments on that? No? We'll move on. So I'd love to talk about Europe's involvement in the agreement and particularly on the subject of the inspections. What role will they play in actually implementing this agreement?
Well, I mean, as we've been discussing, the IAEA is the one that's going to go and check up on them. I mean, the IAEA is an organization under the United Nations, and the French and the British are members of the Security Council, so they have to pay their part. They will get the reports from the IAEA to find out what's going on. But I think basically they have been great, because had they not joined us, and those sanctions against Iran hurt them much more than us. Look at the European economies compared to ours now. So they have paid a heavy price for it. The other thing, and this is just guessing, the Europeans start doing business with them. They're going to have people on the ground there. They're going to find out what's going on. I mean, it's an interesting thing. You can't open up your society and everything like that and keep things as closed as if you had the society that they used to have.
Michaela, would you agree with that statement or disagree?
The French are saying, you guys wait and negotiate a better deal, and it's possible. And it's kind of scary to think, as you said, that Europeans were tougher in negotiations than we were. I guess if you want a deal badly enough, you'll get it. I do think that the Europeans did pay a heavy price, and I think it will be very difficult to go back to sanctions. But one thing to keep in mind, Iranian cheating was so terrible that Russia and China and Europe and the rest of the world came together to impose United Nations Security Council sanctions. And many of these issues are left unresolved because the Iranians do not cooperate fully with the IAEA. And so it's very difficult to establish a baseline from which to judge where is Iranian nuclear program, what are the potential military dimensions.
And don't forget, the sanctions don't get lifted till the IAEA says they're satisfied. So I think this is important. It's, in other words, September 17th or whenever the vote is, and no, it's not going to happen until the IAEA says we're satisfied they're living up to the terms of the agreement.
Mm-hmm. And I think that brings in another question about, if we go with the deal, then it takes exponentially longer for Iran to put the materials together to even create one bomb. And some have said that it may be as short as 2 or 3 months to put together with no deal. Do you take issue with that statement?
The problem is that we need to think about long term, and majority of provisions expire. Iran can modernize its centrifuge infrastructure. It will keep scientists proficient in those types of activities and technologies. And regrettably for us, they do have military purposes and military applications. And so maybe in the near term, we extend the timeline, but people agree that at the end of the agreement, Iran might be maybe in as good of a position as it is today, except with billions of dollars to continue to conduct terrorist activities.
response?
Well, again, we don't know what the world's going to look like in 10 or 15 years, but it's very interesting. If you go back and you take a look in 1975, then President Gerald Ford signed the Helsinki Agreement, and it legitimized Soviet Union control over Eastern Europe. And everybody said that's terrible. The Russians were celebrating. But there was another thing in there that says, in return for that, you're going to have to open up a little bit and all that. That was the beginning of the end for the Soviet Union. So you can't tell, what's going to happen. I have dealt with the Iranians after 9/11 because they hated the Taliban. And, they had a candlelight vigil after the attacks of 9/11. They furnished us intelligence to go after Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. They were the ones that persuaded the Northern Alliance to support Karzai, who's a Pashtun, to take over in Afghanistan. So, they act in their own self-interest. And, I think when the history of what's happening with ISIL comes out, we're going to find out there's been cooperation between the United States and its allies and the Iranians. So I think they'll act in their own self-interest. And getting one or two nuclear weapons, and we and the Russians and the Chinese and the Israelis have hundreds of them, doesn't make a great deal of sense, for it. I happen to think history will show that when we went into Iraq and said we got to get in before Saddam gets nuclear weapons, they accelerated their program. So I think we'll find out.
All right, let's take some questions from our viewers. Rex Hoffman asks, why didn't we keep the sanctions in place until we got everything we wanted? And we'll start with you, Michaela.
I wish we did that. I doubt that we would be able to get everything we wanted, but the truth of the matter is that compared to what the Iranians are getting, they're just getting precious little.
Okay.
Well, I think you had to have an agreement, and what we're saying is when you agree to cut 2/3 of your centrifuges, 98% of your low-enriched uranium, then we'll lift the sanctions. That's pretty significant for them to do that. So I think we are getting something for it.
All right, thank you. And this one comes from Cheryl Parks. Cheryl asks, could you talk about the discrepancy between what the Iranian leaders are telling the West and what they're telling their own people? Are they giving us the shaft, or are they misleading their own people to save face? We'll start with you, Larry.
Well, I think, it's an interesting thing about how politics works. People say things, all of the time, and they're worried about staying in power, so they're going to send, various messages. But if you look at Iran, the average age is like 28. And they have access to social media. They have a pretty good idea what's going on. And I think they want to have a better life. On the other hand, the Iranian leaders don't want to look like they caved in. If they had a program like this over in Iran and people were saying, oh, you caved in, too much, why didn't you do what Pakistan does, for example, or something like that. So I think you have to take all of these things with a grain of salt. If you go back and you look in the Cold War, Khrushchev said, we'll bury you. And he had a lot of weapons to do it. Well, we still went and negotiated. So I think, they've got domestic audience, they've got international audiences. But I think you have to take a lot of these things with some skepticism.
Michaela?
I happen to think that the Iranians are very open as to what their intentions are. Not that long ago, a few years ago, they tried to commit a terrorist attack on US soil in Washington, D.C. They tried to kill a Saudi ambassador, and had that attack been successful, we'd be at war, and we wouldn't be talking about the deal. And so when the Iranians are very consistent in what they're saying, in stating their objectives, in trying to be a regional power. So I don't think they're pulling anyone's leg. Perhaps there is an element of politics in all this, but over the years, with their actions, with their statements, they've been very consistent in trying to harm US interests.
Okay, and now it's time for Answer This, where each guest gets to ask a question directly to the other. So who would like to go first?
Ladies first.
Ladies first, all right.
All right. Larry, how do you expect the verification regime to contribute to actually stop Iran from pursuing nuclear weapons?
Well, I think what the verification regime, basically we've already set them back with getting rid of 2/3 of the centrifuges and 98% of the enriched uranium. So we've already set them back by doing that. And for the next 10 years, they can't do anything about the centrifuges, and 15 years for the low enriched uranium. So we bought ourselves time to find out what's going on. And given the fact we spend about $100 billion on our intelligence, I would hope that they would be able to tell us if the Iranians are doing stuff that they shouldn't.
All right, and Larry, do you have a question for Michaela?
Yeah, I think the question I would ask is basically, let's assume we wanted to go back to the negotiating table, and we were only joined maybe by the French, but not the others. How much leverage would we have?
I think it depends on what happens in the coming weeks and months. I think it would depend on the extent to which we'd be able to convince the international community to continue to uphold the sanctions, especially allies in Europe. It would continue on our ability to make sanctions regime more painful for the Iranians. But I do definitely think that there is an alternative to the deal and that it is not a war.
All right, and now it's time for We Agree, where each guest names something the other one said that he or she agrees with. So who would like to start?
All right, you want me to go? Well, I agree that we've got to be on our toes, that I don't trust the Iranians. President Reagan said, trust but verify. Yes, I think that you have to do that. And to the extent that we do verify and we keep the teeth in these arms control agreements and we work with the IAEA, I think we will be able to verify and find out if they are in fact breaking their agreement.
Great. And Michaela?
I think that we agree that it's a very complicated issue, that we have to take history into consideration, and that we have to keep up our intelligence capabilities, we have to keep up our attention and increase our understanding of Iran.
Okay, that's all we have time for. Thanks to Michaela Dodge of the Heritage Foundation and Lawrence Korb of the Center for American Progress for enlightening us on this very important topic. And thank you for watching Scholars Mate. I'm Jordan Campbell. We'll see you next time.